The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello, you are watching News 9 Live. Our top story at this hour. The war between Israel and Hamas has now entered its 62nd day. Let's get you the latest update from the war zone. Israeli forces and Hamas indulge in house-to-house battles. Israeli forces surround house of top Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Hamas's Gaza leader Yahya Sinwar hiding underground according to the IDF. Israeli forces operating in the heart of Khan Yunis. Israel approves minimal fuel supply to Gaza according to Israeli PMO. UN chief invokes Article 99 to force Security Council to address war. 1,207 Palestinians have been killed since the truce's collapse, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Israeli forces are carrying out house-to-house searches for Hamas terrorists in Khan Yunis, Gaza's second biggest city. The IDF claimed that it had carried out airstrikes on about 250 targets in the Gaza Strip during the past day, while Hamas claimed it killed 10 Israeli soldiers in Khan Yunis and injured several others. The United Nations reported a significant increase of Israeli bombardments of Gaza since the afternoon of Monday, accompanied by intense ground fighting and an increase in Hamas rocket attacks targeting Israel. Amid the escalating conflict on Wednesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres invoked a rarely used clause in the UN Charter to raise the issue on its own initiative before the Security Council, emphasizing that the intensifying conflict, in quotes, may exacerbate existing threats to international peace and security, close quote. Open quote. We are facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system, close quote, he wrote in a letter to the Council. The situation is fast deteriorating into a catastrophe with potentially irreversible implications for Palestinians as a whole and for peace and security in the region. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans continue to flee to the west and south of Khan Yunis, including to Rafah. However, as per the United Nations, shelters in these areas were far beyond capacity, forcing the displaced Palestinians to sleep in streets or in empty lots. According to Israel, it is closing in on Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar. Sinwar is believed to be the mastermind behind the 7th October attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israeli forces have surrounded Sinwar's house. He also said that it was only a matter of time until he is found. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, reported that Sinwar is hiding underground. An advisor to Netanyahu described the operation as a symbolic victory. When asked whether Netanyahu's statement meant Israeli troops were closing in on Sinwar's home, IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari clarified, and I quote him, "The house of Sinwar is the area of Khan Yunis. Sinwar is not above ground, he is underground," close quote. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar told a rally in Gaza last year that Hamas would deploy fighters and rockets in a fierce strike on Israel, the nation that imprisoned him for 23 years. On 7th of October, the deadly Hamas attack on Israel showed his threat was real and not a mere talk.
Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar's speech in Gaza last year was no idle threat.
We will come to you with an endless number of rockets. We will come to you in a flood of soldiers without limit.
It sounded like crowd-pleasing hyperbole. But at this time, a secret plan had already been hatched for an assault on Israel, a country that jailed Sinwar for 23 years before he was freed and rose to the Hamas leadership. October 7 would be the deadliest day in Israel's history, in which the militants killed 1,200 people and took 240 hostages, Israeli tallies say. Israel has retaliated with bombardment and a ground invasion, killing at least 15,000 Palestinians. Sinwar spent half his adult life behind bars in Israel. He was jailed in 1988 for planning the abduction and killing of 2 Israeli soldiers and the murder of 4 Palestinian collaborators. This was the moment he was freed in 2011, one of more than 1,000 Palestinians released for a single Israeli soldier.
This is one of the biggest strategic events in the history of our people's cause in the past years. So we are living a moment of unusual joy.
Sinwar has been leading negotiations for prisoner swaps with hostages, sources say, and it's a personal issue. He has vowed to free all Palestinian prisoners Israel holds. Sinwar is a ruthless man, according to Michael Kubi, a former official for Israel's Shin Bet intelligence agency, who interrogated him for 180 hours in jail. The now 61-year-old militant leader was then in his late 20s, Kubi says, but dedicated to attacking Israel.
Yahya Sinwar was at the prison. He was the chief of the whole Hamas prisoners. They were sitting together. They make discussion inside the prison, of course, and they taught how to fight the Israelis, after they will be released. That was his plan.
Born in the Khan Yunis refugee camp, Sinwar rose to prominence as a hardline enforcer. Before jail, he was head of the Al-Majd security apparatus which tracked, killed and punished Palestinians accused of collaborating with Israel. Sources who know him, whether Hamas or Israeli, agree his devotion to the militant movement is extraordinary.
So he told me, the Hamas is my wife, the Hamas is my child, the Hamas for me is everything.
Sinwar is one of Israel's most wanted. This was Israeli Army Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi in October.
The one who decided on this despicable attack was Yahya al-Sinwar, the sovereign of the Gaza Strip. Therefore, he and the whole system under him are as good as dead.
Regional officials say Israel is unlikely to end the war until Sinwar is dead or captured. 2 military experts said that would be an important symbolic victory. But achieving it would be long and costly for Israel, with no guarantee of success. Sinwar Mohammed Daif, the mastermind of last month's assault, and a third commander direct military operations, possibly from bunkers beneath Gaza, Hamas sources have told Reuters. Some tunnels are believed to be 80 meters underground, and Kubi says Sinwar wouldn't give up.
Even he will fight. I'm sure that Yahya Sinwar wouldn't leave the Gaza Strip.
The Israeli army released a video on Wednesday showing several rockets, grenades, drones and explosive devices in a cache of weapons the army said was found near a school complex in northern Gaza. The army said that it had uncovered one of the largest weapons depots in Gaza with hundreds of rocket-propelled grenades, dozens of anti-tank missiles, long-range missiles, explosive devices and unmanned aerial vehicles. The Israeli army found the weapons cache in a residential area near a complex of schools. The army said some of the seized weaponry were destroyed on site and others were sent for further investigation.
חק"ג 50 מצא אמצעי לחימה רבים במרחב שאנו נמצאים בו כרגע. בתוך אמצעי הלחימה אפשר לראות טילי נ"ט רבים, מאות, וכן אמצעים נוספים אסטרטגיים, דוגמת כלי טיס בלתי מאוישים וטילים ארוכי טווח. אנחנו נמצאים בלב שכונת מגורים, אפשר לראות לידי גם את מרחב בתי הספר, קריית בתי ספר מאוד מאוד גדולה.
The Israeli army released yet another video on Wednesday showing what it claims were airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Since this morning, IDF tanks and artillery have been striking several locations. In Lebanon, an IDF aircraft struck a military command center and military infrastructure belonging to the Hezbollah terrorist organization, according to the Israeli army statement. Israel and the heavily armed Lebanese group Hezbollah have been exchanging fire across the Lebanese-Israeli border since the start of the war on 7th of October. Moving on, the Israeli army on Wednesday released more videos showing ground troops operating in Gaza and also aerial strikes on targets in Hamas a day after the IDF reached Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The footage showed soldiers engaging in combat in residential areas, armored vehicles moving and tanks firing ammunition. A video filmed inside a classroom showed soldiers revealing what they say was an explosive device that was placed inside a school. Aerial footage showed strikes on what the Israeli army said were Hamas terrorists and command centers. Satellite imagery collected by Maxar Technologies provided a detailed snapshot of the challenges and efforts in managing the displacement crises in southern Gaza amid the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas. The images highlight a number of schools, hospitals and other locations where displaced Palestinians have sought refuge over the past week. The visuals also depict new field hospitals have been established in Khan Yunis as well as Rafah. Israeli troops fought fierce battles with Hamas in an expanding offensive into southern Gaza on Wednesday, forcing tens of thousands of displaced Palestinian civilians to cram into a city close to the Egyptian border in order to avoid Israeli bombardment. Facing a huge wave of criticism over his failure to prevent the shock Hamas infiltration of Israel on 7th of October, Benjamin Netanyahu has largely avoided the limelight while conducting a two-front war, one against Hamas and the other for his own political survival. According to political experts, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has no strategy for the war and beyond, but to only remain in power. Residents of the streets of Jerusalem said the moment marked the end of Netanyahu's career, with some calling for his immediate resignation and others wanting his tenure to finish after the war. Netanyahu has long maintained an image as a security hawk, tough on Iran, and backed by an army that ensured Jews would never again ever suffer a Holocaust. The attack saw Palestinian Hamas gunmen enter from Gaza, killing nearly 1,200 people, abducting 240 and engulfing the country in war.
What the war has shown us for nearly 2 months now is that really Netanyahu has no strategy but remaining in power. It's been almost 2 months and Netanyahu has not truly outlined the day after in any substantial detail. The only thing that we see now is a prime minister who is keen on retaining his office as a premier. Beyond that, there is no vision, neither for Israel or for what will happen with the Palestinians. What we have seen on October 7 is the exact result of Netanyahu's divide and rule strategy. What he was trying to do for 30 years now is basically to divide between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, between the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and Hamas and other radical organizations, and effectively favoring the radical organization over the more moderate, in exact opposite to every other Israeli leaders, whether right-wing or left-wing. And Netanyahu has done that not in order to further Israel's security, but in order to further his own personal power.
I think then Netanyahu should step down already. He's the one responsible for what's going on today, and the war is proceeding according to what they wanted to do. But I think it should be led by people who are not that involved with what happened in the catastrophe of October 7th.
The U.S. would object to any proposed buffer zone inside the Gaza Strip, as it would violate Washington's position that the size of the Palestinian enclave must not be reduced after the current conflict. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller reiterated on Palestine's territorial integrity.
The Secretary made very clear in a speech he gave several weeks ago in Tokyo, where he laid out the principles that the United States supports when it comes to the end of this conflict in Gaza. One of those principles was that there must be no reduction in the size of Gaza. And that remains our position, and it will remain our position. So if any proposed buffer zone was inside Gaza, that would be a violation of that principle, and it's something that we oppose. If it's with respect to something in Israeli territory, I won't speak to that. That's a decision for the Israelis to make. But we're very clear that when it comes to reduction in the size of Gaza, that's not something the United States.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned the Security Council of a global threat from the Gaza war on Wednesday. He told the Council in a letter that the Gaza war may aggravate existing threats to international peace and security. Guterres invoked Article 99 of the founding UN Charter that allows him to bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. UN spokesperson Stefan Jurek said the article has not been used for decades.
The Secretary General has today delivered a letter to the President of the Security Council invoking Article 99 of the Charter of the United Nations. This is the first time that Antonio Guterres has done this since he became Secretary General in 2017. Article 99 states, and I quote, that the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter in his opinion that may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. In the letter, which has been shared with you, the Secretary General urges the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe, and he appeals for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared.
In other international stories, Saudi Arabia has urged the United States to exercise restraint in responding to Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Riyadh is concerned about the spillover from the Hamas-Israel conflict, as the Iran-aligned Houthis have joined the regional turmoil by targeting vessels and firing drones and missiles at Israel. The Houthis claim their actions support the Palestinians and vow to continue until Israel ceases its offensive on the Gaza Strip. Riyadh, a major oil exporter, is alarmed by Houthi missiles flying over its territory and seeks to avoid further escalation by advising Washington on restraint, expressing satisfaction with the current U.S. approach. Russian President Vladimir Putin is in Abu Dhabi, the first leg of the rare Blitz Gulf tour. The visit marked a rare foreign trip for Putin since the International Criminal Court, that is the ICC, issued a warrant for his arrest for the alleged war crimes committed in Ukraine. The host nation staged lavish welcome ceremony with jets flying over the city, leaving contrails and colors of the Russian flag. Camel as well as horse cavalry guards lined the route of Putin's motorcade from the airport to the presidential palace. Russian President Putin highlighted the exceptional state of relations between Russia and the United Arab Emirates during a meeting with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan.
Today, thanks to your position, our relations have reached an unprecedented high level. Indeed, the United Arab Emirates is Russia's main trading partner in the Arab world. We cooperate internationally. The United Arab Emirates makes a huge contribution to stabilizing the situation in the world by being a non-permanent member of the Security Council.
It is noteworthy that with this rare visit, Putin has made an effort to counter President Joe Biden's attempt to isolate Russia globally amid allegations of war crimes. The Russian president is strategically rebuilding ties in West Asia, a region traditionally aligned with the United States of America. Putin's rare visit to the Middle East, focusing on global oil markets, the Israel-Hamas conflict and the Ukraine war, aims to demonstrate that Biden's efforts have not succeeded. By engaging with key U.S. allies such as the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, Putin seeks to challenge the narrative of Russia's isolation over the Russia-Ukraine war. Held in the major oil producer, the United Arab Emirates, the key question at this year's UN climate talks, that is COP28, is whether the final agreement will include a decision to phase down oil and gas. Take a look.
The issue at the heart of COP28 in Dubai is whether it will be the first UN climate conference to produce a global agreement to phase out fossil fuels. They're the biggest cause of climate change, and fossil fuels still produce around 80% of the world's energy. Here's a look at who's pushing for a deal. Norway, the US, Canada, Chile, Colombia, and some African nations, including Kenya and Ethiopia, are among the 80 countries seeking a deal. The European Union is also on board. Here's Climate Commissioner Wopke Hoekstra.
I want this COP to mark the beginning of the end for fossil fuels. This is a key part for the EU and for all of our negotiating mandates, meaning that all 27 European member states want this to be part of the negotiated outcome.
Opposition to a fossil fuel phase-out is led by Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China, diplomats said. Representatives of some African nations have said they could support a phase-out deal if wealthy countries agree to quit first. Uganda's energy minister said a deal could be acceptable if it allowed developing nations to exploit their resources in the near term. Asking the country to stop using fossil fuels, she said, was like asking Uganda to stay in poverty. Diplomats and observers told Reuters that some countries, like Saudi Arabia and China, have consistently raised the issue of equity at the talks, emphasizing the high historical contribution of wealthy nations to climate change. But some said they doubted whether these nations would support a deal even if the equity issue was addressed. Another sticking point is whether the deal should allow for continued consumption if emissions are captured or abated. Diplomats say Saudi Arabia, a top oil producer, wants this kind of deal. But the tech is expensive and not used at scale. The UN's Climate Science Panel says it sees a limited role for carbon capture to zero out the world's emissions by 2050. The US and EU support a COP28 deal that recognizes these technologies with limits. Irish Climate Minister Eamon Ryan says it can help in some sectors.
There will be a small amount abated in hard-to-reach sectors, cement, steel, other areas, but that can't be a get-out-of-jail card for international fossil fuel companies, cover for kind of technological wish that, we're going to invent this new technology to eat up all the carbon.
The UN's Climate Science Panel says steep fossil fuel cuts are needed to avert more severe climate change.
In a quiet field in eastern England, a groundbreaking heat pump in Sfahan Prior is generating sufficient warmth to supply the entire village, marking a pioneering step towards achieving net zero targets in the country. As Britain lags behind its goals, especially in decarbonizing over 28 million homes, this innovative project showcases the potential for transitioning to renewable energy. Take a look.
This quiet English village may be paving the way towards net zero for Britain. In Swaffham Prior, a vast heat pump generates enough warmth to supply houses throughout the village. And it's the first of its kind in rural England.
We can connect up to 300 properties in Swaffham Prior, and that will be the entire village running on net zero carbon heat.
Britain is falling behind its net zero targets. If it is to hit its targets by 2050, it will need to decarbonise more than 28 million homes. This is a major challenge, as 85% of the country relies on a gas network, which is much cheaper than electricity used by individual heat pumps. But this vast heat pump, connected to many houses, shows one way to fund the transition when household finances are tight. And residents are feeling the positive effects in multiple ways.
Every morning when I make a cup of coffee, it makes me smile that there's not a plume of oil fumes that I can see out the back. Yeah, it's warm, it runs hot actually, so we keep having to turn it down.
The UK has an annual target of 600,000 heat pump installations by 2028, but it's expected to flatline at around 55,000 this year. The initial costs for installation can also put people off. That's where the government comes in. For Swaffham Prior, the $15 million installation cost was covered by an over $3.7 million government grant and a loan which will be repaid by households over 60 years. The village found that a large heat pump network would be more efficient than individual heat pumps. And the community approach and lack of upfront payment meant residents were also more willing to sign up. Thomas Nowak is the European Heat Pump Association Secretary General.
This is the most efficient way of heating a building. So it will save you energy. You kicked out the old, inefficient, often fossil burning stuff. You put in something new, which is innovative and using electricity and using green electricity in the future. So it can become even more green and positive for the environment.
But will Swaffham Prior's new scheme take off? Britain's Heat Pump Association says demand for projects like Swaffham Prior will only take off if the government uses its taxes and levies system to lower the cost of electricity. Those behind the project also say it will not work for all communities, rural or urban, but it shows how costs of the energy transition can be made more manageable.
After over 21 months of Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine, intense battles persist without a clear resolution, as neither faction has decisively impacted the battlefield. The Ukrainians hoped 2023 would be the year the country drove Russian forces out of the swaths of occupied land. But the front line has barely budged. Listen in.
More than 21 months into the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II, fierce fighting rages in Ukraine with no end in sight. Ukrainians hoped 2023 would be the year the country drove Russian forces out of swathes of occupied land. But the front line has barely budged. Reuters Ukraine chief correspondent Thomas Barmforth.
The main takeaway of the year is probably that there haven't been a great deal of advances by either side during the war.
The war in Ukraine has already killed or wounded hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed cities and villages, forced millions from their homes, and placed hundreds of thousands more under the Russian occupation. Kyiv's much anticipated counter-offensive has so far proved unable to punch through Russian defensive lines in the south and east.
Russia controls about 17.5% of Ukrainian territory. Russian forces are back on the offensive in the east, and they've been mounting pressure on the town of Avdiivka. Many of the Ukrainian soldiers are exhausted, and many of them have been fighting out at the front for almost 2 years. Ukraine's own commander-in-chief has already described the war as at a stalemate. President Zelensky has rejected that characterization, but it really does look very hard to imagine that either side could quickly forge a breakthrough and change things very quickly on the battlefield.
Ukrainians know they must secure Western military aid to carry on, and that it will be harder with the war in Gaza distracting global attention.
It's clear that there is increasing fatigue in the West on the matter of providing military and other support to Ukraine. The White House has asked Congress to approve a roughly $60 billion assistance program for Ukraine that would come through next year. At the moment, it hasn't passed.
Meanwhile, in Europe, a 4-year, €20 billion EU military aid proposal has also run into resistance from some bloc members. Some Ukrainians believe Russian leader Vladimir Putin will use any let-up in fighting to build further defences and regenerate the Russian army for a new assault.
Russia is expected to hold an election in March that is widely expected to hand Vladimir Putin another 6 years in the Kremlin. Some observers think that he may feel his hands are more untied after that election to escalate his war effort. That could include, for instance, mobilizing more Russian men to fight in the army. He may also decide to invest even more effort into the defense industry in Russia.
The strain of the war is likely to weigh on everyday Ukrainians, for many of whom war fatigue has become a fact of life.
I spoke to an internally displaced person from Kherson. His name is Oleksiy. He fled his hometown of Kherson in April 2022 when it was still under occupation. He's now currently living in Kiev and he has no plan to go back home to Kherson because he fears that it's still getting pounded by artillery and he thinks that it's too dangerous. I think there's a lot of frustration, a lot of fatigue, and also a sense that it's going to be a long time until anything goes back to anything resembling normal. Currently, if everything stays as it is, doesn't look like Russian forces have any appetite for peace talks. The Ukrainians themselves, their official position is that they want all of their country back, every single inch of occupied territory to be returned to Ukraine. And their position is that peace talks cannot take place until Russia has left their territory. So it really does seem that neither side is ready for peace talks, and therefore it seems unlikely that the war is going to end anytime soon.
Ukraine celebrated the Day of its Armed Forces on 6th of December as President Vladimir Zelensky assured the Ukrainian people that despite facing formidable odds, Kiev remains firm in its commitment to overcoming Russian aggression. Walking through the winter streets of Kiev, President Zelensky greeted citizens, emphasizing Ukraine's unwavering determination to achieve a fair peace and liberate territories occupied by Russia. The president underscored the nation's commitment to defeat Russia, with concerns mounting over the future of vital military and financial aid from Washington. The president later paid his respect at the Wall of Remembrance, originally erected in 2014 to commemorate victims of Russia's war against Ukraine. During the initial half of the Republican presidential debate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis repeatedly targeted former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley to diminish her momentum before the Iowa nominating contest. Both contenders aim to position themselves as the primary alternative to former President Donald Trump, who continues to lead in polls ahead of the 15 January Iowa contest. The debate, featuring Vivek Ramaswamy and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, featured personal attacks alongside discussions on the Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas conflict, and the U.S. southern border. Former President Donald Trump directed his son Eric not to testify again in the ongoing New York fraud trial that poses a threat to the family's business empire. Trump said on Truth Social that Eric's prior testimony was perfect and saw no point in further wasting time in what he labeled as a crooked court. Eric had distanced himself from the crucial financial statements during earlier testimony, emphasizing he had no involvement with the statement of financial condition. Eric Trump is also a defendant in the case brought by State Attorney General Letitia James. He has already testified alongside brother Donald Jr. and sister Ivanka. The Time magazine named Taylor Swift its Person of the Year on Wednesday, a week after Spotify announced she was indeed the most played artist on the streaming platform. Taylor Swift was picked from a group of 9 finalists that included Barbie, King Charles III, and OpenAI chief executive Sam Altman. Amongst others, Taylor Swift's year included the wildly popular Eras Tour and concert movie, the release of a reimagined 1989 album, and a closely watched relationship with Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce. She's even the subject of college courses. Forest City was an ambitious residential project in Malaysia, but it has failed to draw residents. Buyers are shying away from the development because Chinese developer Country Garden is behind it. Take a look.
Is this a green futuristic metropolis or a ghost town literally built on sand? Forest City is located in Johor, a state in southern Malaysia, but so far it's a city without people. The huge $100 billion residential project was built entirely on an artificial island, just a stone's throw away from the expensive real estate market of neighboring Singapore. It aims to house 700,000 people by 2035.
There's a 3 cluster in here. Totally a 4 cluster. Okay, 3 cluster in here, and the other main cluster in the other side. Okay.
This Malaysian pensioner, who wants to be referred to as Mr. Lim, is one of its few residents. He bought 2 units from Chinese investors after the public learned that the private Chinese developer behind Forest City, Country Garden, had run into financial difficulties. Many first-time buyers wanted to sell. So far, the majority of the 28,000 apartments that have been completed in Forest City have been sold, but hardly any of the owners have moved in. Mr. Lim is confident that this will change with the expansion of the city.
It's 60% owned by the Country Garden, 40% actually, that owned by the Johor. That the local government, correct, including the Sultan. It's not totally owned by Country Garden. So in that sense, that they feel that this one is still quite have potential. So that's why they still keep well maintained. But the keyword is well maintained.
Wherever you go in Forest City, you will come across dozens of gardeners, but most apartments are empty and seem to be nothing more than an investment for buyers. To lure more residents to the island, an entire area has been declared a duty-free zone. But experts say this is not enough. Forest City needs to attract people who want to live there.
When there's no people moving, there's no demand for facility, amenity, no commercial unit or no shopping mall, no retail will move into this city, then this city is incomplete without people.
A look at night reveals the problem. To stimulate more economic activity, the Malaysian government announced a plan to create a special financial zone in Forest City. This tower is reserved exclusively for companies, generating jobs that the local population can theoretically profit from.
Well, of course, it's good for Malaysia because it attracts investment from other countries like Singapore, China, and other Asian countries.
It would be a shame if the place has to close down. I come here with the children, and it's nice to play here.
The real threat to the inhabitants of Forest City is not in the sea. Country Garden is currently among the world's most indebted developers. So far, only 15% of their dream has been realized. Much more investment is needed to keep it alive.
Google unveiled Gemini, its latest AI model designed to emulate human behavior. More effectively than previous models, Gemini excels in tasks such as comprehension, summarization, reasoning, coding, and planning. Available in 3 versions, Pro, Ultra, and Nano. Its Pro version is already out, with the Ultra version set for an early release next year. Currently, Google has integrated the new Gemini Pro with its chatbot Bard, which is a direct competitor of ChatGPT. Users can have a text-based interaction with Gemini-powered Bard, but Google has promised support for other modalities soon. The new update is available in 170 countries and territories, but it is limited to English. Senator Ron Wyden cautioned that unnamed governments are monitoring smartphone users through app push notifications. Wyden's letter to the Department of Justice highlighted foreign officials' demands for data from Google and Apple, revealing a concerning avenue for governments to track smartphones. Push notifications, commonly used by various apps to alert users about messages or updates, often go through Google and Apple servers, a fact many users are not aware of. Apps of all kinds rely on push notifications to alert smartphone users to incoming messages, breaking news and other updates. These are the audible dings or visual indicators users get when they receive an email or their sports team wins a game. What users often do not realize is that almost all such notifications travel over Google as well as Apple servers. Biden called on the Justice Department to repeal or modify any policies that impede this transparency. Las Vegas's police on Wednesday said they responded to reports of an active shooter on the local campus of the University of Nevada, where there appeared to be multiple victims, and then reported the suspect was deceased. The LA Metropolitan Police Department, in a statement posted to the social media platform X, did not elaborate on the circumstances of the incident or status of the victims, but urged residents to avoid the area. The police also said that the incident occurred around Bean Hall,
shooter on campus,
a campus building that houses the business school and other facilities.
And patients are being transported to hospitals. We're still there. We've seen several ambulances pull through this area. Here's some more.
The university posted a message urging students to evacuate from the area.
Shelter in place. So they're obviously telling everybody here on campus to short.
There's no further threat. I will tell you that this combined police, state, local, and federal law enforcement, along with the fire department, worked very well. As the chief told you, we do have one suspect down. Of course, we have no idea on the motive. There are a number of victims that have been transported to area hospitals, so I don't want to give you false information and tell you how many victims that we have, but we will be providing that update very, very shortly. So as you can imagine, the campus is a very large area to cover. Much like we had in the aftermath of 1 October, there's a lot of additional calls coming in that students hunkered down, they're afraid, they're scared. Our officers are going unit by unit, building by building with the university police and the rest of the police officers, firefighters, EMS, and making sure that we don't have any additional victims and or subjects. So we'll be back with you in the very near future to provide an update. Thank you.
We were inside the student union taking an organizing training with Rise Nevada. And, we got notice that there was a shooting happening in the building across from us, BEH. And so we just, we locked the doors, we, turned off all the lights, and then we just kind of got down into, some of the corners behind some of the tables. And then we just kind of waited there about, half an hour into it. We got a notification. A lot of us were following on X what was kind of happening. Then we received a notification that the shooter or shooters were at the student union, which is where we were. And so we just, stayed quiet, stayed right there until the SWAT team came in and were able to evacuate us. There's some scary times when somebody, tried to open the door, and we weren't sure if it was the shooter or if it was the police. And then there was some sightings from either the SWAT team or the Metro Police giving somebody instructions to either run or get down. I wasn't sure.
So we received a call of an active shooter event at 11:45 this morning. Officers immediately responded, engaged the suspect. The suspect at this point is deceased. We do not have information on any potential victims at this point. What I can tell you as well is that the entire Nevada system of higher education in Southern Nevada campuses are all closed out of an abundance of caution. There is no threat to any other campus, but we are doing this out of an abundance of caution.
Iran sent up a rocket with a test living space capsule on Wednesday, the semi-official Tasnim news agency reported, as the country pressed on with plans to send astronauts into space. The announcement came 10 years after Iran announced it had sent 2 live monkeys into space and brought them back to safety. NASA officials and ISS crew members celebrated the 25th anniversary of the International Space Station with a live talk between astronauts in space and officials at the Johnson Space Center. NASA Associate Administrator Bob Kamal listed the significant achievements since the ISS was first launched, highlighting the 3,000 research and educational investigations carried out by 108 countries, according to NASA. Cabana expressed his admiration for the crew's work in conducting scientific investigations aimed at improving life on Earth and preparing humanity for further space exploration. The ISS mission commander Andreas Mogensen reflected on his experience of the unique challenge of weightlessness in space and the fascinating range of experiments conducted on board. Mogensen expressed hope that more countries and private companies would get involved in utilizing a laboratory in low Earth orbit.
I cannot believe it was 25 years ago today that we grappled Zarya and joined it with the Unity node. Absolutely amazing. And when you think of all that's been accomplished on ISS in the last 25 years, 3,000 research and educational investigations from 108 countries around the world, you know, we really appreciate what you guys are doing up there, all the science, the investigations to make life better here on Earth and prepare us for exploring beyond our home planet as we go back to the moon with Artemis and on to Mars.
Well, weightlessness, you know, that is something that is truly unique up here. There is unfortunately no way to train weightlessness on Earth. We can get a taste of it on a parabolic flight, but it's just not the same as actually living and working in weightlessness up here. And it's not just fun, but it's also very challenging.
After a 6-month Hollywood strike, the Screen Actor Guild's American Federation of Television and Radio Artists Union reached an agreement with major studios, putting an end to the prolonged labor dispute that had halted film and TV productions. The approved 3-year contract, supported by 78% of the voting members, includes pay raises and streaming bonuses from Netflix, Walt Disney and other key studios.
6 months of Hollywood strikes came to an end Tuesday. Members of the SAG-AFTRA union approved a 3-year contract with major studios. It ends a long-running labour dispute which brought film and television productions to a halt. The union said 78% of those who voted supported the deal with Netflix, Walt Disney and key studios. The new contract provides for pay rises and streaming bonuses. Union leaders said that amounted to more than $1 billion over 3 years. It also includes guardrails around the use of artificial intelligence in filmmaking, though some actors complained the AI protections needed to go further. The deal requires studios to obtain permission from celebrities to use their digital likenesses and to pay them for their use. Critics argue the language allows creation of synthetic performers that could take away the need for many human actors. Union members walked off the job in July and reached a tentative agreement with major studios in November. Actors started returning to work immediately after the preliminary deal.
1 day longer.
Film and TV writers also went on strike for 5 months this year until they agreed a new contract in October. Hollywood studios welcomed the contract ratification and said the agreement offered historic gains and protections.
That's all we have in this bulletin. Thank you for watching.
China won't let us rest easy on our borders, but they will keep flooding our markets. What does Xi Jinping really want?
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. It's really a matter of showing their dominance.
India's great Chinese conundrum.
Nobody can contain it, not the United States.